for my podcast for the FMF in Freedom Mazini Kuduleko. So I thought I talk a bit about the alcohol ban, the newly reinstated alcohol ban, and what this means for South Africa, for the alcohol industry, and everyone else, the respect for law even. So one of the things that we found out on Sunday evening was that the alcohol is soon to be banned again because the cases in the country, the cases of COVID-19 have spiked, and government is worried that the alcohol is taking up too much space in hospitals, in trauma units, and so on. Because people tend to be more violent when they are drunk. They tend to commit more crime, more domestic abuse, and all of those things, more violence. But of course, it's not everyone. It will be a minority of people. Most people don't do that. Most people are perfectly happy to just drink and be peaceful, or hang out with friends and drink a little bit and hang out with friends and not too much, or just go to sleep, and it's not everyone who's a violent drunk, but of course, because of these few violent people, then the whole country has now to suffer. And also, just the justification itself seems weird. If you consider the earlier decision to reinstate the sale of alcohol after the 9-week lockdown, after 9 weeks without alcohol sales, the government decided to reopen alcohol sales in level 3 of the lockdown. Now, this is interesting because at the same time is that if you understand the trajectory of COVID-19 in South Africa, what was supposed to happen was we would go into lockdown, we would get the health system ready, we would flatten the curve. Originally it was just flattening the curve, but then it eventually became going into lockdown and also preparing the health system. And so we were supposed to be getting ready during the initial 3 weeks of lockdown, starting on March 26th. But it seems that didn't happen because in as much as the president on Sunday was saying that they've built new field hospitals, they've increased the number of hospital beds. There's a project with the CSIR to produce ventilators. Well, the project, by the way, is delayed. They were supposed to produce, I think it was something like 10,000 ventilators by the end of June, and then they failed because a large part of the reason, as I understand, was just regulatory issues, which is ironic on its own, because these people who were supposed to be these researchers, these brilliant engineers and so on, who were supposed to be part of the solution to the problem, were ultimately stopped by government regulations, and it was a government project. And so now the idea is that they will produce their first ventilators beginning of September, end of August, and which is what the president said on Sunday. Anyway, so that was the initial idea of the lockdown: flatten the curve, get the health system ready. And then the president seemed to imply that they had gotten the health system ready. He didn't actually say that, but he seemed to imply strongly that they had done a lot of work to get the health system ready. Whether they had achieved all their goals remains in the air. But now, another thing that was mentioned is that we'll now be introducing an antibody test, which is something that Professor Shabir Madi, who is one of the researchers on the Ministerial Advisory Council by the Department of Health, which is something that he had long ago suggested, and then the government, I suppose, didn't take it into play the first time around. So the stream has started, and I see there's no comments yet, but yeah. I'm sorry. First live stream, you see. So yeah, that's the state of play. That's where we are with the government basically reinstating this alcohol ban because of the spike in, I suppose, in hospital admissions, at the added pressure in trauma centers, in hospitals, and so on. But then they knew all of this before they reinstated before they reopened up the sale of alcohol again. They knew all of this. They knew that this is how South Africans behave when alcohol is for sale, when it's available for sale. This is how some South Africans behave when alcohol is available for sale. They knew that this is how the trajectory of the virus will proceed. So this is one of the things that was said on Sunday. Actually, the president actually said that they expected the current peak. So that South Africa is entering into an expected peak for the the number of COVID-19 infections. And keep in mind that we are still. Let me just confirm that we are still at 4,172 deaths. So this is horrific. This is bad. Like the number of people died, there's a lot of people. But in comparison to some of the other things that kill South Africans, it would seem that COVID-19 is not out of the average or out of the ordinary. But anyway, back to the president. So by admitting that we are entering an expected peak, but then at the same time we have also decided that we are shutting down alcohol again, having opened it up before. What the president is saying is that basically this is not the ban. The newly reopened ban is not because of COVID-19, because it doesn't make sense. Think about it. Why would you reinstate a ban that you had previously had in place, and then decided that the ban was no longer necessary? Why would you reinstate that ban if we are entering a peak that was expected? So this is not a surprise. So this was an expected peak. This is what we've been talking about: delaying the peak, flattening the curve, all of these things. So this is not a surprise that we would enter an increased rates of infection for the virus. But now, what is a surprise is that the case fatality rates, the CFR, is actually lower than what was anticipated. I think it's 1.5% now, which was what the president said on Sunday. So this is given the fact that you have a case fatality rate that is less than expected, meaning that your actual peak is less severe than what you had anticipated. Then why would you reintroduce the ban on alcohol? I mean, knowing what kind of harm it has done to the industry. The CEO of the Beer Association of South Africa was interviewed by ENCA shortly after the president's speech, and basically what she said was the first 9-week lockdown has already done a lot of harm to the industry. More than 35,000 businesses closed down. I'm not sure if she was referring to only to the alcohol businesses or to businesses in general, but she said more than 35,000 businesses closed down in townships. So this is horrific, just because of the lockdown, and it doesn't actually matter if it's just alcohol-related businesses or businesses in general, because there's 35,000 businesses lost. That's I don't know how many jobs that have been lost. And so these are some of the consequences of government decisions to go into the lockdown in the first place, and we are now dealing with those. And on top of that, we will still be dealing with the health consequences after this, after all of this has played out. And so by health consequences, I don't just mean the COVID-19 health consequences. I mean the things that we've ignored, the things we have forgotten about, like TB, like HIV/AIDS. There have been reports that the number of tests have gone down for both HIV and TB. And so these are things we'll have to deal with. And going after alcohol doesn't seem to make sense, because it's one of the things that will be providing the jobs that people will need to deal with some of the other social consequences of going into lockdown. And so it's something that doesn't seem to make sense on the face of it. It doesn't seem to warrant any justification by the government. It seems arbitrary, because it is what it has also done is that no one expected this. It was a complete surprise to everyone. It was a shock to everyone. People who would probably have gone and stocked up on alcohol if they had known. We had some warning, 1 or 2 days warning for the first lockdown, but this time around there was no warning at all. The government just declared, which is another point. They just declared with immediate effect that there would be no alcohol sales. But then another thing to consider with that is that when actually these regulations come into law, when the president makes a speech, or when the regulation is issued in the government gazette, when the regulation is published in the government gazette, and it's available for citizens to understand and for people to study. So those are some of the things that are problematic with this ban, and it's going to harm not only the alcohol industry in South Africa, but also the tax collect the government finances themselves. One of the things that came out was within the original 9-week lockdown, 3.4 billion rands in excise taxes were lost just due to the lockdown. This was not due to the shutdown of sales. This was not the excise taxes that the industry itself would have paid but can't pay because of the shutdown. This was the excise taxes that were lost because of people who took over the job that had been done by the legal alcohol industry. So these are people who took who basically decided that, okay, since the government has shut down the sale of alcohol, then they would distribute they would continue selling in the black market, which is another thing, because this is only going to promote the free market, the black markets, which is, in a way, it's a good thing, because it's sort of it's an independent source of power for people. It sort of undermines some of the things that government will do, because people then have an independent source separate from the formal economy, which government controls to a large extent. And so people have been going more and more into the black market, alcohol sales, for alcohol, for cigarettes, and for all manner of things that were illegal during lockdown. And there is no reason to believe that this would stop after the lockdown. And so the government has created a problem for itself, and it's also facing all these fiscal issues. So at the worst time, informal businesses in general almost as a rule of thumb, they don't pay tax. So there's almost a thing that distinguishes the informal from the formal sector. The taxation, basically. They typically, you can't assess these businesses for tax. For one thing, they tend to be cash only businesses. So figuring out how much the business makes in revenue is a headache for government that they can't really get over. For example, tax is another example, because it's a cash-only business. Like the government it has to rely on what the taxi owner reports as income, and that's how they assess their taxes. But they don't actually know, because the person can basically do whatever they want with their money. So that's the advantage of being a cash-only business, and that's one of the advantages that would be brought about with the wide adoption of cryptocurrency, which is another exciting thing that I hope to see more of personally, with all the I suppose the ructions happening around the world, all the commotion, all the disruptions. I would hope for a greater adoption of cryptocurrency, and I hope that it's something that we start moving towards, because governments have shown themselves to be irresponsible. They have shown themselves to be incapable of resisting the power they have of the control of the printing press. They've abused that power continuously, time and time again. More and more governments are now doing quantitative easing. Some governments have started experimenting with modern monetary theory. An example being the British, the Bank of England, which basically is controlled by the British government. So we are starting to see more and more of these negative things, and I would hope for a greater adoption of crypto, and here in South Africa as well, because we are seeing the growth of these informal markets, or black markets, whatever term you would like to use, in alcohol, in cigarettes, in tobacco, even in that's another thing that's not mentioned, even in vapes. Because the government also, along with the ban on tobacco, they also banned vape juice, which doesn't make sense, because you would think that would be the ideal opportunity for them to sort of promote vaping at the expense of smoking tobacco.